Okay, good afternoon. My name is Jocelyn Lawson. I'm here at the House Museum and in the parlor, in a beautiful parlor, and I'm here today with John Perry. And we will be doing a little bit of an interview with John. So welcome, John,
Thank
and
you.
thank you for doing the interview for us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to start by finding out, when did you move to Millardville?
Well, not Millardville. I came to Coquitlam in 1986 and with my family, and my wife was pregnant at the time. And so we bought our first house near Charles Best Secondary School. So it's in the Chineside neighborhood. And we came here, I think like many people, from Vancouver, which is where I grew up, because housing was much more affordable. And by that time, North Vancouver and Richmond were already getting pretty expensive, so the northeast sector was a natural. Yeah, so that's what brought us here.
Okay. And now, do you live actually in Coquitlam?
I do, yeah. I've lived in the same house for over 26 years, and it's a subdivision that was developed in the mid-1960s, I guess when developers started looking at more rugged territory in Coquitlam. And of course our city is so hilly, I think it's always posed a challenge for development, but it's happened. And so yeah, it's a nice, very nice area. We've been very happy there.
Okay. Were you born and raised in British Columbia?
I was actually born in the United States, and I came here in 1962 with my family. And so I grew up on the west side of Vancouver, and my wife comes from Burnaby. Yeah.
Did you know anybody in the area here in Millardville? Do you know any?
Well, that's a good question. No, I don't think we did. I mean, we had a few, no one in Millardville. We had a few connections in Coquitlam, a few people we knew, but no, not really any close friends. So, but we rapidly made friends, really through the children, and my two boys, and we went to the local elementary school, and first the preschool, Baker Drive preschool, parent participation preschool. Went through those years, and we were very happy with that. I think, like a lot of parents, we had to decide where should our kids go to school, and we were very attracted by the French immersion program, but we both my wife and I felt strongly we wanted our kids to go to a neighborhood school, and it was so close, so that kind of trumped the advantage of having a second language, which I've always thought is very important.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did you do when you came here to Millardville? Did you work in the area here, or?
No, I was a lawyer at that time, and I commuted to Vancouver like a lot of other people. And then later, I worked at a different law firm in Surrey, so I found myself commuting in the other direction. But for quite a few years, I did that. I was in that pattern that I think a lot of people are still in, of, treating Coquitlam as a bedroom suburb, and commuting somewhere else. But that's changing.
And what did you do after being a lawyer?
Well, I made a career change in, I guess, in my mid-40s, and went back to school, did the year of professional development program at Simon Fraser, and I became a high school teacher. And I was fortunate because my area is social studies, and that's always been an area that's overpopulated with high school teachers. And I wanted to work in Coquitlam. That was one of the big attractions, that I'd be able to get away from commuting. So I was very fortunate here. Actually, the school district was very welcoming, and I feel very lucky that that I got on, and I did some time as a teacher on call, about 2 years, and then got a permanent position. So that was and that was enjoyable because those years my 2 boys were in high school, so I felt like I was a little more connected with them and what was going on in their lives. So that was an added bonus. Yeah.
And you did some research about the war?
I did, and my passion is history. I've always loved history, and I really have always wanted to communicate that to my students in one way or another, and I feel strongly that history is more than just a dry collection of facts. It's a way of thinking, and it's an intellectual discipline. And I think it's very important for everyone to have a knowledge of history, because that's how we know who we are. And if you don't know where you come from, you don't know who you are. And I think a sense of personal identity is really, really important in everyone's life. Yeah, I taught history, Canadian history, in high school, and I was always looking for ways to try and engage the students and challenge them, and to get away from just the collection of facts and stuffing them full of more information. And when I studied history at university, it wasn't until I started getting into primary documents, we call them. So these are documents that were created during the time period you're studying, and it could be photographs, and they could be letters, and they could be journals. And I just find those so interesting. And I wanted to get my students working with that. And I also wanted them to get a sense of the detective work that's involved in doing history. Because so often when you read a textbook, you know, it's just all there. And it's like a finished work. You know, you don't have any sense that, well, actually, it's not a finished work. And actually, when you start putting it under the microscope, you see there are a lot of big crevices and gaps in that information, you know. And to me, that's the really interesting part of it, is you know, formulating a historical question and then trying to answer it, and doing that detective work and drawing inferences and really getting back into the past in a way where you're not trying to project today's values into the past. You're just looking at it the way it was, to try and travel back in time and into a different worldview. And that's challenging to do, but I heard about a project that involved all of these things, the detective work and looking at primary documents, when I was at a workshop in Winnipeg. And it was some teacher development. And I think sometimes people think, you know, a lot of these professional workshops, they're boondoggles, you know, where a big waste of money and it's just a chance for people to eat out. But actually, this experience for me was very enriching, and I did get some very interesting ideas. And there was a young woman there who had been a student of a high school teacher in Smith Falls, Ontario. And don't ask me where that is. Maybe you come from Eastern Canada, so you might know. But this teacher had got the idea of doing some research around the local cenotaph or war memorial, and trying to find out something about the lives of the soldiers. And his focus was on World War I. She gave a presentation at this workshop, and it sounded really exciting to me. And so I came back and I did it with my grade 11 students. And what it involved was we rode away to the archives in Ottawa, and we got the service record for the soldiers who died in World War I and whose names appear on the cenotaph in Port Coquitlam. Yeah, the one, it's right, you know, Municipal Square there, right beside the Starbucks. And it's a very beautiful little square, actually. I like the way they've done it. And on that cenotaph, on one side are all the soldiers who died in World War I. And one of the striking things to me was that how many of them there were. You know, you look at the ones that died in World War II and the Korean War, they're significant numbers, but nothing like World War I. And so I thought, well, this will be really interesting. You know, I'm going to give each student one of those soldiers, and their job is going to be to prepare a little biography and to try and bring them to life.
Wow.
And yeah, which I thought was really exciting, and I thought it would appeal to the students because they would each have a life, you know, that they were responsible for. And so we rode away, and we got the service record for each soldier, and this is a collection of documents. It usually starts with what's called their attestation paper, which is it's like a written oath that they had to take when they became a soldier. And it's a very interesting document. It has lots of interesting information about that soldier. So that is in the file. And then their whole record while they were in the Army is there as well. And in some of, you know, in many cases, no one had ever looked at these documents since the end of World War I, you know? So there was kind of that feeling of magic, you know, when the documents arrived and we opened them up, that, wow, you know, we're the first people to look at this for 80 years. So that's kind of, that's something I wanted the students to experience, that little kind of tingling of the hair at the back of the neck, you know, of this is neat, and this sense of connection. Anyway, they looked at that, and the other thing that that I thought was exciting was about this time a lot of information in the archives was being digitized for the first time. So, you know, for years and years and years, the only way you could do first-hand research like that would be to travel to Ottawa. And so, of course, that put it out of the reach, you know, of most ordinary people. But now, all of that, or not all of it, but a lot of it is now digitized, and it's available electronically, which is really exciting. And so we were able to look at things like the diaries that were kept by the military units that these soldiers belonged to. And you know, they could look at that, and they could look at letters and photographs and journals and just lots and lots of interesting information. So that was really exciting. But it was a very challenging task for, you know, grade 11 students. Really, in some ways, the project would be more suited for university students. So I was really pushing them because, for many reasons, but one is these documents are written in a vocabulary which doesn't exist anymore. You know, there are lots of words and expressions that that have changed, and so they really had to puzzle over these things, you know. And as a teacher, I had to do a lot of background work and a lot of prepping, and in a way, it's kind of good that I did that towards the end of my teaching career, because I had a much better sense of what they would understand and what they wouldn't understand. And so that that part of it was quite challenging and quite interesting. I'm going to give you an example. I can't take one from that. I can't remember, but this is an example from another class, Socials 10 class, where we were looking at documents relating to the 19th century. And we were looking at courtship. And there were letters and entries in journals. And I remember one of the letters was from a young woman who was saying, you know, when we go to call, we always wear white gloves, and when we make social calls, we wear white gloves because that's what you do. And we leave a calling card. And I asked my students after they read a few of these documents to write a paragraph summarizing what they learned and what was new and different to them. And one of the students wrote, "This was really interesting. I learned when people made telephone calls, they put white gloves on their hands." You know?
Because they didn't know what to call
No,
it.
of course, that's right. But I mean, it's a very simple example, but it's, you know, it's a good example because it shows you how much has changed and the whole context has changed over time. And so it's really easy to misunderstand historical documents like that. So yeah, it was interesting, but there were just some fascinating things in those service records. I mean, there were, you know, we had soldiers who were hospitalized in England, and we had their hospital charts, you know, with the graphs showing their fever going up and down, and just so interesting. And I remember my brother is a doctor, and I thought I really should send him some of these things and see what he thinks of this.
Yeah.
And the, you know, the medical notes of the time, these little windows, you know, into social history that are so interesting.
Did the children, the student, not children, the
Yeah.
student, were they excited when they received those documents?
I think they were, yeah. I think they were excited. I think they were very excited about it, and some of them were very proud at the end. And I remember, you know, one student in particular who had a lot of difficulty in school. He'd failed a couple of grades, and you know, he had to repeat some grades, and he'd kind of been branded as a troublemaker, you know, and he was struggling. And I remember after I had read his essay, I told him, I said, you know, I think this is great. This is one of the ones I'm going to send to Ottawa. And he was just so excited about that, you know, and for a couple of years after that, he'd come back to the school and he'd say to me, you know, wow, I was just so pleased, you know, that my essay would, you know, be sent to Ottawa, and I thought that was really neat. So that was, I felt really good about that, when you can connect with a student like that and you feel like they've got excited about something. It's great.
Do you think that it would have changed their way of thinking today from what was happening to the men that went to war to
Right.
maybe compare their lives? And do you think it changed the way they grew up?
Well, I don't know, you know, and I've often wondered about that. And as a teacher, often you don't really see the effect of what you've done right away. And it's like you've planted some seeds, and maybe they will flourish, you know, and grow in unexpected ways, but often you don't see, you know, what happens unless they come back later and they talk to you about it. But I certainly hope it did give them some insight, because life was so different in those days. And for those young men, incredible hardship, you know, that we can't even imagine that they suffered over there. And incredible change in their life. But really, really interesting, you know, the detective work that went into it. We had there, one of the names on the cenotaph is John MacDonald. And you would not believe what a common name that is in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And right at the outset, you know, we had to try and identify who these people were. Well, John MacDonald, you know, it turns out that, I mean, there were, I don't know if thousands would be an exaggeration, certainly hundreds of John MacDonalds who enlisted and served in the Canadian Expeditionary Force. So the question is, which John MacDonald was it?
That's right.
You know?
Yeah.
And that was really, really difficult to figure out. And I did a lot of work of that work myself because I thought it would be too challenging for the students. But I remember that particular case, the break that I finally got was there was a connection with Riverview Hospital, and there were actually a small number of men there who were called warders. That was the name that was given to attendants at those times, was warders, who enlisted in World War I. And his name came up, and the light bulb went on. I thought, okay, John MacDonald's the common name, but there probably weren't two John MacDonalds, you know, one at Riverview and one somewhere else in the Tri-City area. So I felt, you know, quite confident that I had identified the right person, but that was a real challenge. And, you know, I told the students about all of that because, again, that helps to give them a sense that, you know, a lot of history is it's like detective work, you know, and it's not easy. You know, there's a lot of complexity there before you can even get off the ground. So an issue like that, trying to identify that you have the right person. Mm-hmm. So that was really challenging. But we found that there was a real, really interesting people, diversity of people involved there. Another source that we used was the local newspaper, the Coquitlam, I think it was called the Coquitlam Star. It's undergone, you know, various name changes, the local newspapers over the last 80 years, but it was publishing, I think, certainly from 1911 to like 1915. So just the first year or two of the war, we had that local newspaper, and that was invaluable because we found some letters in there from some of these soldiers. So that kind of personalized it a little bit because the service records they're pretty dry. You have to be able to draw a lot of inferences from it, but so it was good to find those letters. Unfortunately, the newspaper stopped publishing in the middle of the war, and I don't know exactly. And then I think it started up again under a new name towards the end of the war. But there's a gap, as I recall, of at least a year or two, which is sad because we don't have that information.
Now, some of those men, you said most were from Port Coquitlam.
Yeah.
Do you know if some of them came back and reside in the area here? Did they came back to their Port Coquitlam, and are there families of these men that are still around?
Well, that's a really good question, and I didn't pursue that as far as I would like to. Some of them, they definitely did come back. Our focus was on the ones who died, because those are the only names that appear on the cenotaph. But there were many more who served and then come back. And I know from the work I did when I helped to write the book Coquitlam Now and Then, which was published, I guess, 2 years ago by the Coquitlam Public Library, I came across a number of people, and they did come back to Coquitlam. Some of them came back here to Millardville, and there were French Canadians, you know, who served in World War I who came back here to Millardville. So yeah, definitely they came back and you know, resumed their lives. So,
Would that be something you'd like to research again? Do another type of project
oh
like that?
yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, you could go much further with it. We also, you know, we tried to publicize our project in the local media, and we asked if, you know, if anyone had any letters or medals or photographs, anything like that, if they could get in touch with us. And we did have a few responses, not a lot, because it was a long time ago, you know. I mean, what, next year, 2 years, it's going to be the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of World War I, so a lot of time has passed. But there were some interesting connections, and that's, you know, the magic of the internet now, is that you can cast your net globally. And I think that I did find some people in England, you know, who might have had some of the medals of some of these men. And again, I'm not sure we ever followed that up, but yeah, it was interesting. And so what I had the students do was, one thing they did that I thought was good was, we produced a really big wall chart, because I wanted to try and see what were the similarities and what were the differences between these men's backgrounds. And so we looked at the information that appeared, especially in their attestation record. So you had things like, I don't know if it had their ethnic origin, but their country of origin, their marital status, their occupation, you know, things like that. And then once they enlisted, kind of where they went to train and what was the ship on which they sailed across the Atlantic to get to England. So we put together this big chart where for these 25 or 30 soldiers, you know, we had all of this information displayed visually. And it was quite interesting to see the connections. You know, one thing that I recall that was striking was how many of these soldiers were born in Britain, not in Canada, in Britain, you know, and a lot of them had come over fairly recently. And so that was kind of interesting. And then you know, their marital status was interesting to see whether they were single or married, what their religion, that was another one that appeared, their occupations. I remember there was a local police constable, and so trying to look for some patterns in there was interesting. And you know, so I was trying to get the students to think about that too, making connections, looking for patterns, so that kind of thing.
How old would they have been about?
Young, very young. And actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because there was one of the most interesting ones was this kid he was 14. Can you imagine that? He was 14. He lied about his age, which was not uncommon in that war. You know, and I can't remember whether you had to be 16 or 18, but he was 14. He lied about his age. He went over, he was in the trenches, he was gassed.
Oh my God.
And he went back to England and was in hospital there, and that's where, I guess, someone found out, well, he wasn't even 16, you know? So he was sent back to Canada, and he ended up dying in Victoria, you know, and I don't know how old he was, and I suspect probably his injuries had something to do with his premature death, but I can't remember. He might have, or it might have been he died in the infamous influenza epidemic in 1918, but it's just this remarkable remarkable, I'm trying to remember his name, Brad Bertie or something like that. Just amazing story. There was another soldier who was, I think, ended up in London, and he never made it to France because he contracted syphilis. You know, and that's another whole untold story about a lot of these soldiers when they got to London. You know, they do what soldiers have always done, you know, through the years, and I suspect at that time that was a great source of shame for his family, you know, and that was another story I think that would have been really interesting to dig into a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was very, very interesting social history there.
Yeah. Now those men that came from England and
right.
came to Canada, they went to fight for Canada.
Yeah.
Were they Canadian? Did they become Canadian and then?
Well, that's a good question, and don't forget, in those days, if you were a British subject, you were a subject of the Queen, you were sort of automatically Canadian, I think. And that's an interesting, you know, question. I don't even know if the category of Canadian citizenship would have existed, you know, for someone who was already a subject of the Queen. So it was just kind of like going from one part of the Dominion to another. But yeah, but I don't know. I don't know. It's a good point. Good question.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very interesting. So where is this research now?
Well, that's a good question. And the idea was each one of the students wrote an essay, and I packaged it all up and sent it off to Ottawa because it was a national project, and the idea was that to get as many Canadian communities as possible doing these research, and then it was going to be put on the internet, on either a Veteran Affairs website or some official government website. And I'm sorry to say, I sent it off and it went into limbo, right? Which was really disappointing. And you know, I made a couple of efforts to contact people in Ottawa, and I had the sense that the file was kind of passed around, and it just kind of fell between the cracks in the bureaucracy there. And it was sad, and I feel a little bit guilty that I didn't press it more, but you know, you're busy as a teacher, but I was disappointed. I was disappointed for my students because I wanted them to have the satisfaction of being able to go to the website and say, wow, that's my work on there. You know, so so I don't know exactly what happened, you know, whether they ran out of funding, what the problem was. But that was a little bit disappointing. However, all of the service records were photocopied, and they are now with the Port Coquitlam Heritage Society, which is great. And they also have a copy of all of my students' essays.
Oh, good.
Yeah, which is really, really nice. So, and I think that's where Doug got the information, Doug Rawling, when he was writing those chapters of the book, Coquitlam Then and Now. So the research hasn't been lost.
Yeah, it's just quite as...
It would have been nice if it had like a...
recognition.
National recognition,
yeah,
exactly. That's right.
And the map that you created.
Well, that chart is also, I know that Port Coquitlam Heritage Society has a copy, and probably I should get a copy of that to here, you know, to our own Coquitlam Heritage Society. I'm sort of glad that you've mentioned that because it'll remind me to do that, because it'd be nice to have a copy here in Coquitlam. Because, it wasn't just from Port Coquitlam. Some of these people came from Coquitlam and specifically from Millardville. I wish I could remember some of the names, but I can't. And as I say, there were French Canadians who were involved in that too.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
They must have been very proud, though. It's a lot of work, but must have been proud to at least know, because so many people don't know the history.
Yeah, well, it was really, really satisfying, and I'd like to see more of that being done. The one episode in our history here in Coquitlam that I think would be interesting to dig into is there was the famous strike at Fraser Mills, which maybe you've heard about, in the 1930s. And again, when we teach Social Studies 11, for example, the Depression is, the dirty 30s is a big part of that. And I think it would be so interesting to use that strike as a case study, because it's right here. And the trouble with a lot of Canadian history is we're such a big country that when you talk about places back east, it's very remote for high school students here. And I think if they could actually go and see and say, oh, wow, that's right down near Mackenhouse, where that happened. It could be more meaningful to them. So we have some information on that strike. In particular, there was a woman who did her MA thesis on that strike. So that's really good, valuable information. And she
Is she still around, this lady that did?
She is, yeah. She became a lawyer, and I corresponded with her. I can't remember where it got left, but she did a wonderful job, and she looked at the, there's a French word for this, fonds, F-O-N-D-S. I think it means that like the archives or the corpus of documents that they have out at UBC around the strike. Partly the documents, I'm looking at the sign out here, the Canadian Western Lumber Company, which of course was the company, and then some of them were the union documents. But that was very interesting. I mean, that strike, there was violence, and there was, the police were called in, and it was a protracted strike. But where I'm going with that is afterwards, the man who was the head of one of the unions that was most active in the strike was a man named Harold Pritchett. And he went on to become the head of the IWA. Is that the International Woodworkers of America? I'm not sure, but he's a really interesting figure. And he came to the Tri-City area, I think, around the turn of the century, like around 1910, 1912, 1913. He came to Port Moody, and then he was involved in this strike. So he came from a British trade union, very militant labor background. And after the strike, I think he was blackballed, and as a lot of the leaders were. And so he went on the dole, and in those days, if you were unemployed, they put you to work digging ditches, and so he was involved, I think, in road building right here, right in this area. And he led an occupation of City Hall. This is the old Coquitlam City Hall, with other unemployed workers sort of demanding better conditions. This would be around the mid-30s, 1935. And they actually held the councillors hostage in City Hall, and they had to call the police. And we have these recordings of interviews with Harold Pritchett that I think were done in the 1970s. There was kind of a bit of I think a resurgence of interest in oral history at that time, and there were a number of people who were doing that kind of thing. So there's a recording of Pritchett, and there's also a recording of his arch rival, the then mayor of Coquitlam, whose name I think was MacDonald. I can't remember. There's a school here that's named after him. R.C. MacDonald, maybe? He went on to become a minister in a British Columbia Tory government, I think in the 1940s. But so there's also an interview with him in which he talks a bit about this. But I just think that's such an interesting episode, you know, that it would be really neat to try and find some more of the primary documents and, you know, put together the research on that. And
yeah, because it's a big part of the Coquitlam history.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and people know about the strike, but they don't know about that so much.
How it started.
Yeah.
How it ended.
Exactly.
And yeah, that would be a very interesting story.
Well, we probably lost the historical moment because, you know, last year with the Occupy movement, I thought, wow, that'll be really timely, you know, to bring that out. But I think there's so many interesting little corners of social history that that could be explored, and it could be done by high school students.
Sure.
You know, another area I think about sometimes is Riverview, and you know, to me, one of the things that's most significant about Riverview, or Essendale as it used to be called, or the Hospital of the Mind as it was called originally, is that whole area of the treatment of the mentally ill is really, really interesting and rich social history. And, you know, we had it right here for almost 100 years. And I think there are probably a lot of forgotten stories that could be brought to light. You know, there are a lot of problems. I mean, there's still confidentiality concerns, but if you could dig into some of those records and some of those stories, I think it would be really, really interesting. And I was thinking about that. I read the report recently that was put together about the future of Riverview.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about that.
Not so much. I know there's a lot of controversy about the land and what to do. And
exactly.
Protection of the land.
Yeah, and there was quite an impressive study that was done last fall. Didn't really come to any conclusions or decisions. It wasn't meant to. I mean, the politicians are going to have to make those decisions. But it's an interesting document because it brings together a lot of information about Riverview. You know, everything from the architecture to the wildlife to the flora and fauna and
Well, some of those trees are
really interesting.
incredible.
Yeah, very. And you know, and the people who came and made submissions, really interesting. There was a whole community that lived out there. The patients, of course, but also the doctors and the nurses, and many of them had families who grew up on the grounds of Riverview. So a lot of them came and they made submissions. And there were a few patients too, but I thought it was rather sad that they didn't have more patients, and you can understand why that would be.
Yeah.
But it, you know, there are the many, many interesting stories there, I think, and when you include the families that are involved.
Yeah.
So lots of social history there.
Good. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So are you planning to do more research in your
Well, I'd like to.
publish something?
I would like to. I would like to. It's like everything else. I'm semi-retired now, and I always used to laugh when people said they were so busy in their retirement, but it's really true. You know, you can get pulled in a lot of different directions, and but I think you know, it'd be so good to involve high school students in doing some of that. And I see there's a conference coming up on BC Studies at Douglas College. I don't know if you've heard about that.
No.
But, you know, I'm thinking that maybe there'll be a local history component to that. And I think people are getting much more interested in local history. That was my sense when I helped write the book on the history of Coquitlam, which I did along with Doug Rawling and a number of other people last year.
You're going to celebrate 125.
And we have the 125th, celebration coming up.
2016.
That's right. And all of these celebrations, are windows of opportunity to do things, and opportunities to get money too, funding.
Yes. To do those research
Yeah.
are very important.
Yeah, that's right. So, maybe that's something where high school teachers and the high schools can become involved in the 125th celebration. And I'm one of the members of the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee for the City of Coquitlam. So again, as I talk to you, I think, that's something we should do, is try and get some high schools involved in that.
And do some research and report.
Doing the research, doing the history, yeah.
Your children, are they involved in history? Are they curious?
They are actually. I have my older son is, he is 25, and he's completed one degree in history, and he's studying political science. And my other son, my younger one, is 24, and he's doing a master's degree in philosophy. So I guess something must have rubbed off there.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we hope to see some new documents and reports.
Yeah.
Research.
Yeah.
Come and maybe in your power.
Yeah.
Something done with Riverview and
Yeah.
look at history.
Yeah. Well, I think the kind of thing you're doing here is just great, and the more of that occurs, the better. And I think it's wonderful that you've included high school students in your project, and that you've had them doing some of the interviewing, because that's exciting for them, and it makes connections between the generations, which is really good.
Yeah. They need to know their heritage.
Yeah.
Where they come from.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Their
right.
children don't want to know. And
Yeah.
that's what keeps us. Is there anything you would like to add about their history or life here in general now, from what you've studied and?
No, I can't really can't think of too much, other than I do hope that we can promote history. And something else I'm thinking about is through the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee, we've been looking at the issue of public art in the city, and in particular in connection with the Evergreen line. We're going to have 4 stations in Coquitlam, and there's going to be an opportunity there to have some public art in the stations, and I hope we can include some heritage material there. And so I'm thinking, and I hope everyone will be thinking about, what are some things that we might want to see in those stations to remind us of our heritage and our history. And
maybe some of those little stories that were used to and were
exactly
about.
Yeah, that's right. Some of those stories, old photographs. I love to walk, and as I walk around our beautiful city, I'm starting to notice public art and heritage more, and trying to think about ways that we can incorporate that, in an effective way to give us all a sense of history. Because we do have history here, people think, well, what history is there in Vancouver? We're not like Europe. We don't have really old buildings. Well, No, we don't have things that are quite that old, but we have still quite a bit, and you know, a lot
And
of
it will
stories.
be old.
It will be old. That's right.
So why not start now? Because
Yeah.
I think we might be in a position where people now know what's going to happen, and people's going to be searching. So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. People are going to be looking, and I think public transit, you know, is that is going to become very important in the future. It's one of the important themes of the development of the Tri-City area, I think, is trying to create a really good system of public transit. And I think if we can incorporate some reminders of our history into that, it will be great. One thing I've noticed is when I ride the buses, I see that there's a project to have poetry. You know, I don't. Have you noticed that? On some of the buses, there are these beautiful poems by local poets, and I think that's great. You know, we can make some room for this. It doesn't all have to be commercials and advertisements, you know, and corporate logos. We can have.
and there's the Trans-Canada Highway that's going to be terminated at some point. The walking trail.
Yeah.
There's opportunities there.
Yeah.
Big
Absolutely.
opportunities.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. So yeah. Good.
Good. Good. Are we good with time?
We're good with time. We've got about 10 minutes, a little less than 10 minutes left. If you don't mind my throwing a question out.
Oh,
there.
sure.
With your, I guess your background in teaching, we had a number of people who commented on the historical, I guess, presume it would have been early 50s, when the Catholic schools marched up all the students and said, okay, you take them because we're not. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any recollections that may have been?
No, I don't know a lot about it, but I also came across that when I worked on the book Coquitlam Then and Now. And I was responsible for the chapters on the 1950s and the 1960s. Yeah, and I remember coming across that and thinking, that's really interesting. But no, I certainly don't know a lot about the details of it. I thought it was interesting because, I guess because in Ontario, there is a separate school system, right? French and English schools. And that is entrenched in Ontario, I think, for constitutional reasons, in a way that it isn't here in British Columbia. And so that's what kind of tweaked my interest and got me thinking about that. But Rob, is it?
Jeff.
Jeff, yeah, you may know more about it than I do.
Probably just from hearing people talk about it in these interviews, but yeah.
Yeah, and but no, I'd be interested actually in hearing that information. And you know, we should have known more about it when we were writing the book, and put more information in. But no, I'm pretty ignorant about that.
No worries.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd throw that one out and you just had people comment on it and with your background. That was quite some time ago, I would imagine, too. So.
Yeah. Was there anyone who had actually personal experiences that?
Yes, we had a couple people who, one I think who was a student at the time.
Oh,
and I think one who was a teacher at the time.
Yeah.
Or was involved in the educational system, might not have been a teacher, principal perhaps. But
Right.
Interesting aspects, and of course the whole, you know, it happened in this community, but it had ramifications, you know, throughout the Lower Mainland. Basically, it was pushing that, you know, private versus public school issue, and of course being here, you had the French issue kind of mixed in.
Yeah.
But really, the bare bones was, if it's a Catholic private school, why should they not be getting some funding, right? Or why not do it all ourselves until. The system at the time said, forget it, you want to do it yourself, you pay for it, and it wasn't until they basically dumped all the kids on the system saying, there, if you're going to give us no choice,
Right.
And for a while there, the schools were inundated. They had to have, you know, split classes to deal with all the students. And I'm presuming the outcome was that funding did go to private schools, because of course everything went back to normal after that year. But it was a tough year for students and teachers alike, from my understanding.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, yeah, and you know, a lot of those issues too crop up in the present. I mean, as a social studies teacher, I was always trying to make connections, you know, between the past and the present, and because often what happened in the past informs what's going on now, you know, and I really do believe strongly that if you want to make good decisions about what's happening now, you have to have a sense of the past and the history of an issue.
What's the quote now? That if you don't know the past, you're just doomed to repeat the failures of the past. I can't remember the exact quote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And I don't know where that comes from, but it's yeah, it's definitely true. Yeah.
Great.